Today's training is on dependent charter schools. We'll give just like 30 more seconds as people come into the room here. Happy New Year for any of you that I haven't seen or spoken to since the beginning of the year. And of course, this is a Charter Authorizers Support Initiative quarterly training for on dependent charter schools. If we want to go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a little bit about CASI. The Charter Authorizer Support Initiative is a collaboration between the California Department of Education's CDE's Charter Schools Division and the following LEAs: the Los Angeles County Office of Education, San Diego Unified School District, Santa Clara County Office of Education, to support professional development and networking opportunities for charter school authorizers. This work is funded through the Public Charter Schools Grant Program, authorized under Title IV, Part C of the Elementary Secondary Education Act of 1965, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. And just as a reminder, I will be reading every word on the slides as is required. I will be adding to the presentation as well, but I do need to read all of the slides. And next is our caveat that is part of every presentation. The information that's contained in this presentation is provided as a reference only. Charter schools and chartering authorities are encouraged to review the laws and regulations and consult with their own legal counsel regarding the applications to their specific situations. And just a quick review of the CASI offerings. We have these quarterly trainings, but we also do the monthly charter chats. You see Michelle leads most of those monthly charter chats. We have one-on-one technical support. All three of the LEAs do that technical support. We all have specific expertise, so we might hand you off to someone that has expertise in the particular area that you are requiring assistance with. We also do on-site trainings for specific things that you might need in your district or county. We are in the process of building our mentoring program. We're working with a little over a dozen LEAs right now with their charter authorization. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be a QR code if you're interested in participating in that mentor program, either as a mentor or a mentee. And then, of course, we have lots of participation in conferences as well, Charter School Authorizing and Oversight 101, and other specific conference topics, depending on what you all ask from us and would like to know. We do tailor our presentations to what your needs are. Next, I just want to give you everything you ever wanted to know but didn't realize you needed to know about dependent charter schools. And before we do this informal poll, I just wanted to be completely honest that I don't have a lot of experience with dependent charter schools. San Diego Unified has kind of tapered off and all of our schools are completely independent now. So I haven't worked with a lot of dependent charter schools. So the beginning of this presentation will primarily just be facts and information and ed code about dependent charter schools and how they came to be. And the next portion will be with the experts. We have an expert panel here today that will be answering some prescripted questions, and then also we'll be taking specific questions from all of you about your particular dependent charter schools. Next, we are going to do a very informal poll here to get an idea of what kind of audience we have today. We have just about 50 people participating in the training, and we want to know how many charter schools does your district or office authorize? So if you want to go ahead and put that in the chat right now, you can add who your district is and then how many schools you authorize. If you don't authorize any yet, you can go ahead and still add what district or county you're working with and put 0. That would be great. Thank you, Michelle, for getting us started. Okay, so it looks like we have a wide variety from 20 to 1 to 1 pending. Really glad that you're here. And some people are adding whether or not they're dependent or independent. That's very helpful, getting an idea of how many dependent schools we have as well. And then, see, we have a lot of people answering, about 30. That's great. And then if we can just get a couple more people to answer a non-classroom based question. How many of those authorizers also authorize schools that are non-classroom based? So we can just only answer if you do authorize schools that are non-classroom based. We have 3, 2, pending. The moratorium on non-classroom based schools just lifted as of the 1st of this year. So if you don't currently have a non-classroom based school, you may have a petition coming to you soon. So we are having another bonus quarterly training, not quite quarterly, next month that will include non-classroom based charter school information. So I just wanted to kind of front load that for you. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll ask if there are any topics that you would like us to cover that are that have to do with non-classroom based schools. So reviewing a petition or site visits or general oversight. So if you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind, what you would like to see in that training, your input is highly valued. And we'd like to tailor it to what you all need to see. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the agenda for today. We're going to do some welcome. I'm glad you're here. And introductions. I'm Tiffany DeGraffenreid from San Diego Unified School District. We're one of the LEAs that are part of the CASI grant. We also have Michelle Johnson here. She's part of the Santa Clara County Office of Ed. We have Tom Hutton here. He is from CCAP. He will be helping us with breakout rooms. Debbie Deal will be helping us with some finance, portion of the presentation today. And we have a few others that I will introduce later that will be part of the expert panel. Today, we'll just review some authorization basics, dependent charter terms and concepts, governance and operations, finance, and then move to our expert panel. And all of this is focused on dependent charter schools. Oh, well, there we go. I already did the introductions. Did anyone else want to introduce themselves that I missed? We're good. Okay. And then the types of charter schools under California Education Code are listed here in the Ed Code sections. 47605 would be a district benefit. 47605A2 are conversions, not startups. These were originally district schools that became charter schools. Education codes 47605.5 are county charters, and then education code 47605.6 is countywide benefit, and education code section 47606 are charter district. So each of these have different education code and different sorry, I've lost my train of thought there for a second. Different specifics that go with renewal and denial with each of those education codes. Those are linked there in the presentation and then also available in the resources after the presentation. Other terms, concepts, and key points, types of schools under state law are non-classroom based, and that's found in Education Code Section 47605.1, and then indirect, locally funded, and this is what we call dependent charter schools, and direct funded, those are the independent charter schools. So an important information here is that relationships with dependent charter schools still must observe the same or some of the properties of the authorizing relationship. And this is basically the authorizing relationship here. This is what we have been talking about in other quarterly trainings and all of our charter chats. The charter school's role is drafting and submission of the charter petition, providing the day-to-day operations of the school, complying with all legal requirements, ensuring students make academic progress. This is the charter school's role, whether they're a dependent or independent school. The authorizer board role is the decision-making, collaborating with the superintendent and staff, receiving information to make high-quality decisions, reviewing performance of school on an ongoing basis. And then the authorizer staff's role, this is our role, is processing those board actions, the petition, the renewal, the notice of violations, reviewing petitions, conducting oversight on behalf of the board, ensuring all laws are followed, ensuring that the required reports are submitted, managing communications with the school, and processing any complaints. And we're accountable to the superintendent. So these are all the same things for dependent charter schools as they are for independent schools. So oversight responsibilities exist for both dependent and independent schools, even though that dependent school might look and act a lot like a district or other county school. It still has to follow all of the charter oversight requirements that are in Ed Code. The petition is the roadmap for that oversight. So Ed Code Section 47604 ties the authorizer's liability to performance of the oversight duties. And this education code does not differentiate between whether or not the charter school is directly funded or locally funded. So that would assume that it is all charter schools. Charter oversight requirements. This is something that we talk about in almost every single training. At an absolute minimum, you're required to identify at least one staff member as a contact person for the charter school. This is much easier, I'm sure, as a dependent charter school. Visit each charter school at least annually. I know that this doesn't necessarily always happen as a site visit with dependent schools because you're sometimes on the campus a lot more often informally. Ensuring school complies with all reports required of charter schools by law, including the Local Control Accountability Plan, the LCAP, and LCAP Annual Update, monitoring fiscal condition of each of the charter schools, and providing timely notification to the California Department of Education of renewal, revocation, or a school that ceases operations. So those were all things that are good for all schools, whether or not they're locally funded or directly funded. The next items are specific about dependent charter schools. And what I always found interesting about dependent charter schools is the specific definition, which is on the next slide, that this term, dependent charter school, is not found anywhere in the education code. It's something that we use, a term that we use. It's usually created by the district or county. It can also be called other things, like affiliated schools, arm of the district. I know that there are several other terms besides dependent. I bolded the word usually here, and I am using it like Michelle uses the word, it depends, because not all dependent charter schools were created in the same way or in the same fashion. They're also very unique, just like our independent charter schools. So when I say usually, that there is always an exception. They could be a conversion of an existing school into a charter. Locally funded means that the funds pass through the district or the county rather than going directly to the charter school and the charter school creating their own budget and expending their own funds. They're usually the governing board of the charter is also the authorizing board. And then it operates for most purposes as a school of the district or the county. It usually has the same policies, procedures, practices, and employees as the district or the county. Now, I know that there can be some differences, and some dependent charter schools have created contracts or agreements to have some policies that are different, some procedures that are different, some employees that might not be hired by the district or the county, but for the most part, those are all the same as the authorizing district or county. Now, I love statistics, so I just wanted to throw a stats page in here so that we had, or a couple stats pages in here, so we have an idea of how many dependent charter schools we're talking about. So based on the CDE's 2025-2026 certification of information, only 286 of the 1,249 charter schools are locally funded, are dependent charter schools. So that's about 26%, a quarter of our charter schools are dependent. The certification of information, if you haven't checked it out, is very interesting. It gives a lot of information about the type of governance of these schools. You can tell whether or not they're funded locally or directly. So I suggest you checking that out if you have an opportunity to look at some of the other charter schools in the state. The vast majority of the locally funded charter schools are under the governance of the authorizing board of directors. Many charter schools listed an advisory council or advisory board or governance committee as part of their governance whole. So they make decisions that advise the authorizing board of what they would like to see happen in their dependent school. Only a handful report having their own governing board. And then again, this is more of a it depends type of slide. How did your dependent charter school come to be? And in doing some interviews for this training, I heard lots of different stories about how dependent charter schools came to be in the particular districts and counties that I talked about. So the dependent charter school met a particular need at that time or a desire in the community that the district couldn't fulfill at that particular moment. The district can occupy the field to meet the need first. Ability to draw attendance from outside the district boundaries. Sometimes it opens different funding availability, like the public charter schools grant program, and some advantages under prior revenue systems as well. Relatively more flexible on facility rules. If it was a conversion under previous federal law, a program improvement intervention for underperforming schools, this was an option for schools to become charter schools. And then there's a choice for a new charter school on the California State Teacher Retirement System or public retirement system, PERS and STIRS. And then I think I'm handing this over to Michelle now that knows quite a bit more about dependent charter schools than I do. So she's going to give you some more in-depth perspective here.
So thanks, Tiffany. So I also get to drive the slides. So I'm wearing two hats right now. So with regards to dependent charter school oversight, I completely agree with Tiffany. It's a little tricky with regards to governance, and because a lot of times the dependent charter school has the same board as their oversight board as well as the governing board of the district. And so when we're looking at Education Code 47601, which states that all charters will operate independently from the existing school district structure, well, how does that work when you have the governing board of the district also the authorizing board? So the board now has to sit down and ask the question, which hat are we wearing? Sometimes the easiest way to do that is to actually have two separate board meetings. So it may be on the same night, but the board of the charter school will hold its meeting first, do the actions for as the board of the charter school, and then come back and reopen the meeting as the board, the district board, so that they're realizing they're wearing those two different hats. So agenda, convene, recess, reconvene, make sure you have minutes. Also, you need to pay attention to the school's advisory council. This is going to have some of those impacts around LCAP. So as a dependent charter school, they have to have their own LCAP. And it's the board of the charter school that has to approve that LCAP. So it's going to be a little difficult if you have the district board approve the LCAP, unless they're saying we're now the board of the charter school. So it's just being aware of the situation. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to jump through all of these different hoops to make it work. It just makes it easier as you're trying to go through it. So another issue. Charter staff are usually the district or county office employees. Many may have limited experience with charter schools. I was actually having a conversation with an entity that the superintendent and board said, hey, we want to open up a brand new charter school and we want to have it take place immediately so that we can open in July 1. And I'm like, okay, so how can I help you when you're trying to now create a dependent charter school, still meet all of the requirements of oversight and monitoring. And when you have employees of the district, there's no requirement that they have to go work at the charter school. And so you need to make sure that as you're looking at all of these different pieces, what are you putting in place? Are the charter school employees going to be employees of the district? Are they going to have the same rights and same union protections? You'll have to sit down with your unions to even have that conversation about whether or not what are the protections that are now going to be in place. One entity for legal advice purposes, a dependent charter's memorandum of understanding might be different. You might not even need an MOU. I know that we have a dependent charter school for our county, and we have an MOU. It's a little interesting having an MOU with yourself, but we have a charter schools department as well as the rest of the county office and the Opportunity Youth Academy. And so in order to make sure that we protect that oversight piece, Charter Schools Department created the MOU that is now signed so that we can have that separation, so that it doesn't look like that so we don't have a conflict of interest, because we still need to maintain charter school oversight. So it's interesting, but it's also doable. So I think I now turn this back to Tiffany.
I think you have one more
You think
slide.
this one's mine? Okay.
Yes, you have the 3 slides.
Oh, I had 3. Okay.
Yeah.
So financial. One of the biggest issues with regards to dependent charter schools is financial. Biggest issue is commingling of funds that makes it difficult or impossible to separate out the dependent charter school's finances. I know Debbie Deal is going to be talking a little bit more about finances, but please be aware that should the charter school close, that you need to make sure that you can tease out those expenses, those requirements. You want to make sure that the funds are not commingled. Easiest way to do that is put them in a completely separate fund. Finally, as I spoke earlier, LCAPs. Charters are their own LEA. Therefore, a charter has its own LCAP. It is not part of the district's LCAP. The same requirements for a dependent charter school are the same as an independent charter school. They have to follow all of those criteria for the LCAP process, and it should be distinct from the district. The authorizer simply reviews the LCAP. They are not approving the LCAP. So when the board is sitting there to now approve the LCAP for the district, they really should make sure that they're separating out and going, okay, now we're the board for the charter school and we are approving the LCAP for the charter school. I know that's a lot of information, but if you have any questions, feel free to throw it into the chat or come off mute, or we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. But there you go, Tiffany.
One more.
One more?
You got one more.
All right. Common dependent charter school oversight questions. Well, can a charter employee be transferred to the district school? Well, the answer is the employee is the employee of the district. But what does the collective bargaining agreement say? What does the petition say? Is there an MOU? What does it say? So the answer is, well, it depends. I know that for our dependent charter school, we had a question pop up specifically about this. They are employees of the county office. They have the rights to transfer back, to transfer forward. So we need to make sure that we are looking at all of those various documents to make sure that the employees are protected. Can a district employee be transferred to the charter school? Maybe. The collective bargaining agreement may prohibit forcing employees to go work at the charter school. In fact, most petitions say no employee is required to work at the charter school. I see Tom just came off of mute. So, Tom, do you want to chime in on this one?
No, I just was accidentally uh, moving my screen around. But it refresh my memory. Am I thinking of another state statute? But I thought there was something that said you actually can't force teachers into
Right. You can't
employment,
force
right? Not
anyone
not
to
not not,
go.
not collective bargaining, but actually statute.
So, I don't remember whether or not it's a statute or not, but you can't force anyone to have to go work at a charter school because charter schools are, by their nature, at will positions and they are at will employees. So when you're dealing with a dependent charter school, if they are if they are still employees of the district, well, they are protected by collective bargaining agreements. Most charter schools do not have collective bargaining agreements. And so there's a whole new little piece of uncertainty there. So you need to make sure you go back and look at the collective bargaining agreement, you look at the petition, you look at the MOU. Sometimes dependent charter schools are not the easiest things to operate, but they are also sometimes the easiest things to operate.
Michelle, if I can chime in,
Absolutely, Renee.
yeah, good morning, everyone. Kind of to bring the theory and into practice, specifically with LAUSD, where I worked 12 years, and they have approximately 53 what they call affiliated charter schools, which again is synonymous with dependent charters there. There's specific language that says, while every effort will be made to avoid assigning any certificated employee to an affiliated charter campus, the district retains the right to make such assignments in cases where no other alternative is available. And they say, for example, reasonable accommodation. So again, because they are district employees, and in a sense, also that would apply to any district employee going to another campus where needs are needed. That is the language that is built into that, like human resource placement of staff. So just an example there of how at least LAUSD in that realm deals with affiliated / dependent charter schools and placement of employees.
And you will all be happy to know that Mr. Cordona is on our expert panel soon. So he obviously has a lot of expertise to share with us. So we're happy for that. I think we'll go ahead and move into some breakout rooms now. The breakout sessions will be randomized. We have a few people leading those. Tom from CCAP will lead one of the one of the rooms. Rick Ferracci from our office. Oh, just kidding. He doesn't have audio. Joanne, are you good to go? Okay. Joanne will lead a room. Michelle will lead a room. And is Jeff here from Laco? I think Indra volunteered you if you're here. I don't see him coming off mute, so maybe not. Amy, do you know if he came in?
I did not see him, and I set
Yeah,
up 5 rooms.
our whole team is at a capacity interview right now.
Ah, Renee, would you
So-
mind leading one of the breakout rooms?
Not at all.
Okay, great. Do we need more than that, Amy? Or that's
I
good.
think that's good.
Okay, great.
How long are we wanting to do this?
15 minutes would be great.
Okay.
So this is just an opportunity to discuss your questions, your experience with dependent charter schools, any specific scenarios that you are currently having, or whether or not there is a conversion that might be happening now or in the future in your district or county. So I'll see you all back soon. So as everyone is coming back, I think I'll just have the facilitators do a short little review of what was discussed in your room, anything that came up that was interesting or aha moments. Michelle, did you want to start? And then you can pass your baton. Did I lose Michelle?
I can start for
Okay,
our room.
thanks, Joanne.
Yeah. So our room, we just discussed, how do you notate things on your board agendas to make it clear, what's being discussed for the district, what's being discussed for the dependent charter, what are things that are going to apply to both, and how can you notate that? And then we also discussed at length just kind of this idea of job sharing and, creating new positions at the dependent charter, and kind of what are some of the parameters around that. And I will pass it. Well, you also led a room, Tiffany, so I will pass it to you.
I did have a room. We spent some time talking about direct funded and locally funded, and how many districts think of their schools as dependent, even though they're direct funded, because they rely on so many resources from the district or the county. So even though they're with their SELPA and they're using their HR and their custodial services and back office support, they're still direct funded, so they are still independent schools from Ed Code. So we spent a little bit of time talking about what a dependent school actually was. Tom, did you want to talk about your room?
Sure. We had, maybe by accident, sort of a fiscal focus group. We had a bunch of fiscal people, and those were the questions. B. Moa from Sac City was sharing how they have several dependent charters, and to Michelle's earlier point, the district historically has not really separated out the charter funding, and then within the charters among the dependent charters. So that means that they've had not as many data points as they need for the school, so they've been working on that. We also had a question about just like in reviewing things, the FICMAT materials are fantastic, but they're a little overwhelming if you're a very small shop. So we kind of pointed people toward, you might want to look at CCAP's version, which still gets you the information you need, but maybe is a little bit more manageable. And if you run into a situation that seems more specific or complex than the simpler version gets to, the FICMAT resources are a really good sort of backup reference. And just in general, one thing, I'll just editorialize, share my thing. One of the things that we have found at CCAP when we've worked with districts with dependent charters is sometimes over time with turnover, people have sort of forgotten that the petition is out there, addressing questions that people, things just kind of evolve, and it starts to look more and more like a school of the district, and people kind of forget. And then they we had one client that ran into a collective bargaining situation, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, what does the petition say? So if you've had that kind of turnover with your district staff or your county staff, and with whoever on your team is in the dependent charter, it's worth revisiting that petition.
Great, thank you. It's a good point, definitely. Michelle, I think you were having some mic issues. You ready now?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yeah. So my room was lucky enough to also have Debbie Deal in it. And so we got to talk about finance. We got to talk a little bit about renewals, and basically said, that it's not easy, but you do need to make sure you're trying to tease things out.
Okay, and then I think we had one more room. Was that with Renee?
It was. Thank you for that. So we had a rich discussion on the whole reviewing and approving process that takes place with the LCAP, and again, the relationship of that with dependent charters and the role that both the authorizer might need to take, then the school district layer, if that's applicable, and then the county office. And depending on, again, where that dependent charter school is authorized, then the roles that each play, and how sometimes that can get a little slippery, and at times also leads to LCAPs that aren't quite written as well as they should. So we discussed a few scenarios of how best to attempt to work in positive relationships with each of those dependent charter schools to ensure that the outcome of the LCAP is a positive one. And then I think another thing that was reinforced in our conversations were just the power of returning to the charter petition for dependent charters. Obviously, strong consultation with legal counsel whenever questions arise, and further reviewing any MOUs or additional language that again further supports in getting answers to those questions and those source documents.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and move forward with our financial oversight framework. Debbie, were you ready to take the wheel here?
I am. Thank you,
Great.
Tiffany.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to have probably 10 slides that, just kind of touch on fiscal for charters, and more specifically diving into some of the tools and things that you might need in order to make your evaluation, whether it's an independent or a dependent school. So what is the role for successful fiscal oversight? And I'd say, and have always said, building a good relationship, a partnership, providing that support, really good communication, and sharing expectations for that renewal process. We've talked a little bit about the petition and the MOU, and that's a really good starting point for ultimately you are going to have a renewal. And so all of that time in between the board approving that petition document and moving forward to the renewal period is an evaluation of the fiscal oversight and many other components of that petition document, including academics, of course. Providing key fiscal information to charters on major budgetary financial updates that affect their budget assumptions throughout the year is a really good, important piece. And I must stress that county offices do a really good job of dispersing information to school districts. We don't do a really good job as authorizers dispersing that information to our charters and our dependent charters as well. So making sure that when the governor's budget is happening, any kind of legislation is, coming up, when the COVID funds came in, one-time monies come in, those kinds of things, that affects their budgets. And a lot of times they don't even know that they have these additional dollars, or they're not aware of what, COLA's dropping or COLA's rising, or what does the governor's budget say. So I encourage you to provide key information to charters, all charters, dependent and independent. And then really for the authorizer to really understand the basics of oversight and best practices. We'll have a little more of that as we move on. Thank you. So monitoring the fiscal condition, I have to go back on my FCMAT days, I'm sorry, but the top things for me that can go wrong in a fiscal environment for charter schools is an enrollment drop. Of course, an enrollment gain would be really super great, but a lot of times what we see is these fluctuations, these enrollments that we think are going to be 50 more kids and they don't materialize. We've also seen, and especially since COVID, but it's gotten better over the years, this average daily attendance percentage, because we know that that's how we get paid. right? So ultimately, you can have kids, but if they don't show up to school, you don't get paid. We all know that. The unduplicated pupil percentage is something that a lot of folks don't pay a lot of attention to. But if you look at that year over year trend, even small percentages can be big money. So I encourage you to take a look at that as one of your top issues here. And I have six items here, but I kind of classify them as the things that can go wrong really fast, especially cash on hand and their ultimate cash management, especially in times where economic conditions are changing. We're in one of those right now with federal funding. So sometimes, we have to pay attention to these things in between reporting periods because we don't know, like, for example, if federal funding is going to get cut or reduced. What is that impact in that multi-year? And then what are these board approval timelines? And are we meeting these timelines for the LCAP, for the budget presentations? So timely reporting is very important. So I put these into different bundles, and I have 3 different formats for that. The first one is what I call short-term indicators. These are the things that go wrong really fast for charter schools. And remember, charter schools don't get a state loan. School districts can get a state loan, but charter schools cannot. So when they run out of cash, they run out of business. So how many days of cash on hand do they have to pay their bills? What about those cash flow projections? And we've already mentioned that charter schools actually do not have to be in compliance with AB 1200. So therefore, when we're looking at these cash flows in future periods in year 2 and year 3, which they're not obligated to do these AB 1200 requirements, but for dependent charters, a lot of them will automatically do that. But will they be able to meet their obligations each month and each budget year? Enrollment variances, I already talked about that a little bit. Does the projected enrollment meet the revenue that is expected? And are there adjustments in these different periods? The same with average daily attendance. Is the projection coming true? Are we monitoring that on a regular basis? Or are we waiting until P2 and go, oh, what happened? So we really need to pay attention to these things like monthly and especially at each reporting period. And the unduplicated account I already talked about. Do they have any fluctuations in that unduplicated account? And we should be watching out for that as well. Next slide, please. The next slide is really going to be about, I think we kind of missed a slide in there, but that's okay. This is the timeline for reporting, and whether you're a dependent or an independent charter, you need to have a timeline for each one of the mandatory reports. So dependent charters too also have to have these adoption budget and the LCAP. So when we're talking about the LCAP, and remember the purpose of having a different kind of entity structure, such as a dependent charter school, is so that they can have a different demographic. And so those LCAPs are going to necessarily be different at times. It depends on the district. But I have seen LCAPs for the district and for the dependent charter school be very, very different based on the school's demographics. Those have to be in conjunction with the adopted budget, and those reporting requirements, has already been said in this presentation, are the same. Interim reports, first interim, December 15th, no different. Second interim, March 15th. And then unaudited actuals, which is the closing of the books, excuse me, before September 15th, and then the audit. And we'll talk a little bit more about the audit. Next slide, please. Once again, the district is still considered the authorizer and must perform its fiscal oversight duties just as in any other charter. So whether it's a dependent or an independent, there is no difference. And so how do we do that? And I think Michelle talked about that. It's very difficult to keep that arm's length relationship, and it must be at arm's length so that you meet that statutory directive and maintain independence to ensure compliance with the petition and hopefully the MOU and all of the California statutes. Next slide, please. So what is different? Well, these are the things, and there are very few that are different. The LCAP, as we've already talked about, must be presented separately. The charter must maintain independent fiscal operations. And I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth because we've talked about this best practice here at the bottom, where we should be recording all of the financial activity in a separate Fund 09 just for the charter schools. But we have many, many districts authorizing multiple dependent charter schools in Fund 9. And Fund 9 has one ending fund balance. And so all of these dollars then combine or commingle in that fund balance. And remember, our financial systems are annual. They go year to year to year. So somehow or another, we need to sort this all out. While you can set up a site number for each one of the charters, most systems in the state of California will not allow the ending balance for each one of those sites to be separate. So you need to kind of understand your system or how the system can be changed to accommodate that. You can record, for example, Title I funds by site. So if you have two dependent charters in Fund 9 and they both get Title I funds, you can assign them to their site numbers, like Site 1 and Site 2. But when we close the books each year in our fiscal systems, then what happens is that those fund balances fall to the bottom line, and there's only one fund balance in Fund 9. So unless your system is able to do Fund 901, Fund 902, Fund 903, something like that, you need to think about this as you are adding your dependent charters and talk to your fiscal office about how to separate these funds. I can tell you that this is probably one of the biggest challenges for school district authorizers in this space is how to keep those funds all separate. In addition, they earn interest revenues. And so how are you going to assign interest revenues for their funds within Fund 9? So this is a real big challenge, keeping these things very separate. And it's also important because of the LCAP. And so when we are reporting our LCAP results, and we're trying to blend that in with our fiscal components, makes it very difficult when these funds are all combined. One tip I will give you is sometimes charters come and go. And so upon closure, what do you do with the remaining funds? And we've had a few districts lately where they've said, hey, we had some charter closures. What do we do with these remaining funds? Well, the Ed Code does allow that in your petition documents, in the closure section, that you identify how those funds will be treated if a charter school closes. So you should pay attention to those petition documents and look at that closure section. And those funds can be reverted back to the authorizing district, or they can be sent to another charter school. But if it's undefined, it becomes a real problem for districts about what to do with these unused funds. Next slide, please. So charters must maintain fiscal operations, not just for general purpose funds, but as I have already said, for federal and for state categorical funds as well. Commingling these funds is difficult, absolutely almost impossible to track the goals and the actions for LCAP in Fund 9. So you need to make sure that you pay a lot of attention to this piece because they are required to have a separate LCAP. Then you have to make sure that you can identify the funds that go with these goals and actions. Because as I said previously, the charter schools demographics may be really quite different, and that affects the LCFF calculation, and therefore it's going to affect the LCAP. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about services and audits, and this is another unique section for these dependent charter schools. The charter may purchase administrative services beyond the 1% oversight fee. Here's your ed code 47613D. So they might purchase, and a lot of schools just quite honestly don't even charge the 1% oversight fee. But if you do, just be aware that you can also charge for those additional administrative services beyond the 1%, just like you can with other charters. The charter school, for audit purposes, will be included in the district's annual audit. However, the auditor is expected, and we should follow up with our audit teams to make sure that they are stratifying samples to make sure that they are staying within state compliance for audit purposes and also for federal purposes. Next slide, please.
I think that's it. I can take over from here, Debbie.
Thank you so much.
Unless do you have anything, other closing comments or?
No, I hope I didn't scare everybody, but
Thank you so much. I just have a few quick additional thoughts before we get to our expert panel. And these are just things in interviewing several dependent charter school authorizers that were mentioned when I spoke with them, that these dependent charters are not 501(c)(3)s, which can be required to apply for loans and specific grants. So that this sets them apart also. Dependent charter schools can also be restricted to all agreed upon RFQs, the request for quotes for the authorizer. So if the district already has an agreement with a specific entity, then the dependent charter school may also be expected to follow that agreement as well. The dependent charter school may be required to use the same student information system as the authorizer. I didn't find many that used a separate student information system. I don't know how often that occurs, but that can be really difficult for, say, a non-classroom based or an independent study program using a student information system like ARIES. ARIES wasn't necessarily built to keep track of independent study. It's more difficult. So, there's those kinds of things to think of. They can be subject to all the authorizers' policies and procedures, even if that's not something that is within the dependent school's philosophy, that particular policy or procedure. So there could be some contention there as the district forms new policies and procedures. There are possible restrictions with the school calendar. I met with several districts that had dependent schools that operated on a little bit of a different calendar, and they had some meal issues with the cafeteria not in service during the time that the school was in session. And then also they would adhere to the authorizer salary schedules, which can be restrictive as well. Did anyone have anything else to add to those additional thoughts before I introduce our panel? Michelle? Did you want to? Was this question for Debbie?
So it is a question for Debbie, but it's also just throwing out that idea of how it might be workable, because it's like with your independent charters that they have a CMO fee that they pay for the curriculum, the back office, the all of those different things. So maybe when you create that MOU between the district and the dependent charter, you can create this service agreement to provide those additional sources. Am I getting the right idea, Debbie?
Yes, I can't see the question. Can you define
Oh,
the
it's in the
question?
chat.
Okay, let me see.
It says, so could the additional charges, HR, business, etc., be like an indirect cost rate or an interoffice service agreement for the additional services above and beyond oversight?
It can be above and beyond the oversight. It could be beyond the 1%. They can actually, like Michelle said, establish, a service agreement and, agree upon a fee for those services. So Michelle's exactly right on. It's no different than on a CMO purchasing services for HR or technology or any of those kinds of things. Yes.
Can I add something a little bit that with Sac City's MOU with our charter school, Amanda and I, we work on identifying, in their MOU, like let's say business service, what are the services that's required that they have to provide through the MOU to our dependent charters. And then we also have this, we call it an admin fee, whereas depending on what services or that the charters need, those are an additional fee on the side. And so they know that, so we differentiate between, okay, departments, these are what you're supposed to provide them as a whole as a charter. But then the charter also understands that there are certain services that an admin fee that we require per students that we charge them on the side too. And so with our 1%, we charge them like an 8% instead of like a 0.8%, I'm sorry, a 0.8%, and then we do an additional charge. So that, sometimes our dependent charters are such a small school that sometimes they can't absorb all that cost. And so that's where we're trying to find the balance of, well, like as a district, we are not overcharging them, but we are also charging them a reasonable cost amount so that they can also operate as well too. So that's what our MOU consists of.
That's a perfect example of a district that has worked out an arrangement between the dependent charter school and the district, but there's nothing in law that says these are the services that have to be provided to a dependent charter school. They must be treated exactly like an independent charter school. You would have no obligation as a district to supply very specific services like payroll and purchasing and such to a independent charter, and therefore you're not required by law to give those to the dependent charter. However, it is a good example of how a district normally works with its dependent charter. Thank you, Bea.
Sac City also graciously allowed us to use their recent MOU that they created with the dependent charter school as a sample. So we do have that available as a resource material at the end of the session so that you're able to take a look at that as well. Thank you very much. And then if we can go on to the next slide, I will go ahead and introduce the dependent charter expert panel, and then we can move on to some of our questions. I want to welcome Renee Cordona. He is Coordinator 3, Charter School Office for Los Angeles County Office of Education. He brings over 25 years of experience as an educator and administrator in two of California's largest school districts, LAUSD, and San Diego Unified. He brings a deep expertise in the charter school sector, having served 12 years in LAUSD's charter school division, where he supported authorization, oversight, and accountability systems for over 270 charter schools, and most recently with Los Angeles County Office of Education's Charter School Office, where he continues to champion student outcomes through collaborative leadership. Thank you very much for joining us, Renee. And then we have Michelle Zebly. Michelle, did I pronounce your name correctly? Your last name?
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. She is the Deputy Superintendent in Butte County Office of Education. She has been an educator for the past 32 years, serving as a classroom teacher, a special education teacher, principal, director, assistant superintendent, and now as the Deputy Superintendent. Since 2014, Michelle has led the Student Programs and Educational Support Division for the Butte County Office of Education. Since 2019, Michelle also has served as a lead negotiator for BCOE. Michelle has a strong advocate for alternative education, including charter schools, and is the proud mother of her 2 adult children. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have also met Bee a little bit earlier. She's the budget analyst at Sacramento City Unified School District. She has over 15 years of experience with Sacramento City, serving in multiple roles at both the school site and district levels. Most of her experience has been in fiscal roles, which has given her a strong understanding of school district budgeting processes. Bee has been in the role of budget analyst for the last 3 years, where she supports charter school finance and oversight. Thank you, Bee. And then we have Barbara Mendelbaum is here with us today. She's a coordinating consultant from CCAP. Barbara, can you give us a wave? Hello. She leads CCAP's statewide team of authorizer consultants who provide direct consulting services to local district and county authorizers, including training and developing the capacity of internal staff. She also helps develop and update CCAP's authorizer tools and resources with a particular focus on assisting smaller entities. And then we also have Christopher Raffanelli. He has served as the superintendent of Liberty School Districts in Petaluma for the past 20 years, leading close-knit community-driven school known for its commitment to academic excellence and the whole child development. Before joining Liberty, he was a principal in both Sacramento City Schools and a local charter school in Petaluma. Christopher began his career teaching in South Korea before returning to California to teach in the Los Angeles Unified School District South Central neighborhood and later in Petaluma. He has experience as both a superintendent of dependent charter schools and as a member of the board of directors of a district that authorized dependent charter schools. So thank you and welcome to our expert panel. I think we can go ahead and remove the PowerPoint for now as we ask some of our questions. I will get us started with some questions, but I would love for people to enter questions into the chat as well, or come off of mute and ask their own questions of our expert panel. And we can direct questions to certain people based on the backgrounds that I've read, or feel free to whomever would like to answer as well can answer those. So my first question is about governance and autonomy. How do you balance a dependent charter's operational autonomy with the district's ultimate authority over curriculum and personnel and budget? My expert panel cannot be shy. Renee, did you want to take that one?
Certainly. Again, thank you for the question. I think when it came down to operational autonomy and weighing that in relationship to the district's ultimate authority, we walked a very fine line at the charter schools office at the time that I was there, working with district staff and specifically the operations and the instructional directors that oversaw those affiliated slash dependent charter schools. So the nice thing was it was a balance between obviously the district's initiatives and the goals that they had for those charter schools on the operational side, on the academic side, and truly then on the governance side because they were following district policies. And so where it sometimes blurred a little bit is if that charter school wasn't doing well and they were coming up for renewal or part of the oversight, we again had to walk and do a fine dance with the leadership of that school to ensure that everybody understood that, again, we're talking about a district school, not about an independent charter school. So even how things were communicated as part of those oversight visits and things were put into writing meant that then the superintendents over those districts where those dependent charter schools were located knew that then you were talking about them and their schools and not an independent charter school outside of the district and the implications that had on the school board and the families that they represented. So often it was seeing that those schools were doing well. And at LAUSD, many of those dependent charter schools are some of the highest performing charter schools because of their locations and their demographics. So it was rare, but when those things happen, it was in conjunction again with district staff and making sure that curriculum, personnel, and budget, all those things were in alignment. So it wasn't just the charter schools division, it was lots of different people achieving that end.
And I'll say in Butte, we treat it similar. So they are schools just like our other schools. They have autonomy in some ways as, setting direction and coming up with initiatives and doing hiring. But our staff can bump into those programs. We treat them the same with curriculum that has to be adopted and reviewed by our curriculum and instruction. So we have them just like one of our schools. And then they get the extra support of being a charter with visits and authorization and oversight. So that's how we do it in Butte.
And I would just add to that really quick. For me, it's always a system of loose and tight. So by nature of being a dependent charter, there are so many things that those schools don't have access to because they are often under, the purview of the collective bargaining agreement and they have limited flexibility there or maintenance and operations or personnel rules. And so there are these constraints, but always stopping to look first at where you can provide them that flexibility. And then, especially if they're not provided that flexibility right now, where can you provide that flexibility and start to flesh that out? But then the opposite is true. If they're kind of floating out there by themselves, and I see this happen a lot in the work that I do, we have school leaders that are often principals. They don't know how to run an entire organization. And so sometimes it's the opposite. It's pulling them back in and making sure that they have that established floor and ceiling for how they should be operating. And then they have that flexibility where you can provide it.
I also wanted to add that, when I first came on to the district, a lot of, even district staff, including the charter staff, didn't really understand the clear role between what is a charter, what is a district, are we part of the district, are we not part of the district? And so I think a lot of part of that is when me and Amanda, we came in, we had to kind of really clearly identify what are the roles, what are the charter's roles, what is the district's role. And so that was the 3 years work that we've been in. And I think that, clearly understanding and educating all of the staff, charter staff, even, the advisory staff of like, what are your roles? What are your responsibility? And so, coming up and having to put all of that in the MOU that we have, will clearly kind of help because, when there is no clear line, it's really hard for any kind of decisions to be made. And so, with our MOU, it's to clearly define like where that line is, good fence makes good neighbors. So that's what the MOU was for. And so establishing that, I feel that would clearly help me as the fiscal person to really go in and dig in, like, okay, what are the pieces that I need to, separate and whatnot. So just it helps with the decision a lot, and that's the purpose of the MOU.
When we established our first dependent, we already had an independent at that time, and so we actually just adapted our MOU from the independent. It was a pretty extensive MOU we had in place. We adapted that for our dependent charter and really used that as the sort of outline for how we would create our governance structure and our logistical structures for how the program was running internally. We really wanted to maintain some pretty defined requirements, even though the dependent was purchasing services through us for basically the entire back office program. We wanted that defined. We wanted to make sure, what level of support we were providing was also being reimbursed appropriately, that everyone in the system understood what the expectations were, and in particular, with quite a bit of independent authorization experience, it was very important for us to make sure that everyone in our system understood deadlines and expectations and all the sort of little things that you get caught up in when you're doing all the back office work for an organization.
It sounds like the communication piece is really key here with the autonomy and the authority piece for sure. You did mention something about the governance structure, and I was wondering if any of you have found the most effective model for governance for dependent charter schools. I've heard a lot about advisory boards and the role of school site councils, but with the authorizing board still being the charter board. Can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of governance that you have seen for dependent charter schools?
So for us, we've done both in terms of our having an independent board for a charter, and then also our district board acting as the official board, but then an advisory panel or advisory board that sends recommendations to them from the school.
We have, our board is their board, and then it is understood that as the authorizer, that our curriculum instruction office is very involved in supporting them in that way and also they have local councils, like their school site councils and parent advisory committees.
Michelle Johnson mentioned earlier that some organizations are running two boards. So the charter school board may be opening and then closing that meeting, and then the county office or district board conducting their business. We tried that once in a previous position, and it did not work well. And it wasn't because we couldn't figure it out. We understood the compliance. It was within the superintendent's office and the understanding there about how we're putting those hats on and taking them off. And so what I found was I wasn't getting the documentation that I needed for state and federal compliance. And so that's just a caution. If you're going to do that, make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you try it.
So how did you solve that issue? Was it just one meeting with separate agenda items, or?
Well, that's how it was previously. And then they tried to do it as Michelle suggested, where the charter business was happening with the governing board outside of the regular board meeting.
In a
And
separate
that
meeting?
did not work well based on the people that were putting the agendas together. And so it reverted back to what it is now, one.
And Michelle, does your board do one meeting but just separate agenda items, or do you do two meetings?
So
Oh, I
our
meant
defense.
I meant Michelle. Zach, sorry about that. Michelle Z.
Just one meeting. As Barbara shared, it can be really confusing, especially for boards that don't understand all of the different hats they wear. So we just do one meeting, but agendize things as appropriate so they know what the topic is.
Okay. And then just a reminder to all of our participants, if you have a question for the panel, please feel free to put it into the chat, or you can come off of mute also and ask your questions. I have a question regarding material revision and renewals. What types of changes have you considered as a material revision for dependent charters? Or have you done any material revision for dependent charters?
Sorry, I'm more of a fiscal person. Amanda will be better fit to answer these renewal questions. So
I have fiscal questions too. Don't worry. I have some for you.
I know for Sac City that they have some language written into their policy, and with regard to what a material revision is and is not. And so I was thinking the same thing as Bea brought that up. First and foremost, what does your board policy say about that before you consider what your thoughts are on material revision?
You can also include that in your MOU, so it's very clear.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would agree with that. And really fast, I think because of the layers that apply to dependent charter schools, they often had to be in consultation with their local superintendent to make sure any of those things, again, were in line with what they wanted before it even went to the district at large. Again, just given the size of LAUSD, and often if they wanted quote unquote a material revision, often the question was, is that a waiver that you could even apply for? Because again, within the structure of the local school leadership council, then again, having those discussions with the local district superintendent, was there agreement there? Was that again one of the waivers that they could even get an exemption for? And so it could be in, again, things like curriculums, things like professional development, things like class schedule, and kind of class sizes. So those were kind of things that again had to go through those layers, and it wasn't necessarily a material revision. It was more can and you submit a waiver in alignment with all those different stakeholder groups and get that approved because of going back to kind of the MOU and some of that structure that was naturally built into those conversations.
Yeah, and I think, I learned from one of the best, Miss Barbara Mandelbaum right there, but really it's about being transparent. Sometimes it may require a material revision, which is, a different set of work, but also does the board need to be updated and shared when we make changes? And that's where we want to be. If it requires a material revision, we'll do that. But the big piece is being transparent and keeping them involved with all of the different changes that we're doing.
And just a piece that I remember, one of the example of the material revision is the number of enrollment the charter schools can have, and that is embedded in their MOU. And so when they go over their cap, then that's where like we have to kind of look at what's going on, and that's the conversation when we take to the board as well too. So that's an example of the cap of enrollment that's placed in our MOU for us.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna move on to another question unless a participant has a question. I don't see anything in chat, but I'll sit in painful silence for a second if someone wants to come off mute.
I do
Tom,
have one
go
thing
ahead.
that I want to add, going back to the governance piece, and I think we already touched on governance, so it might not come up again. Earlier, it was mentioned that some dependent charters have their own board, and what I tend to see statewide, and there are lots of different options, so this is by no means a one size fits all. A lot of those charters that have their own board written into their petition tend to be some of the oldest charters in the state, and they're established in a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times established in a way that wouldn't necessarily be approved today. I wanted to bring this up because one of the things that I see consistently is that sometimes those boards are acting more as an advisory council. And so the LCAP is going to them and the budget is going to them, and they are not really operating as a board. And so that's something to pay very particular attention to. If those need to have a material revision done to bring them back under the board of the district or the county office, I would really consider doing that. And then likewise, when those charter schools are filling out that CDE charter school certification, they may be indicating that they have their own board, but I also see a lot of times that dependent charters think they have their own board. They don't understand that their board is the governing board of the district or the county office, and that their procedures are not policies, they're procedures that should align with district or county policy. So having those conversations with those charter school leaders to make sure that they're really, really clear on organizational structure and are using the correct terminology is really important.
I did find that to be true as well in contacting some of the schools and districts that answered in a certain way on the survey, and then found that to not be true when I got down to it. Not because they were trying to be deceitful, but they didn't realize what their board actually was. So,
right. And that's a really good reason, pointing back to establishing that floor and that ceiling, right? The system of loose and tight, because that's what happens when we don't have that system with a dependent charter. And then they're doing all kinds of wonky things that don't represent their organization well.
So on the governance side there, one of the things that we've tried to do over the years is to do joint board and advisory committee meetings so that, one, they're openly communicating, but also it's just a good reminder to, if you have an advisory group, to understand that there is an active board that does actually get to make the final call and make the final decision in the process. And so going back to what was mentioned earlier, communication, I think is incredibly key, building those relationships and making sure you have people in place who understand their roles.
thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about monitoring systems, or maybe even specifically site visits. Is there any difference for a site visit for a dependent charter school than there would be for an independent charter school? Is there an oversight process that would be significantly different there?
We have two independent charter schools, and we treat them the same for our visits and oversight. Try to get out there regularly, go to their board meetings, and then have a group of different types of educators who go out for visits. So we treat them the same.
For Sac City, you know, when I first came on, it was messy, and we had a difficult time because our department is also doing the back office for our dependent, right? Budgeting their money, recording their revenue and everything. And then we also having to define the authorizing piece of it. The independent was really clear cut. We just, take their financial, do the review, do the site visit, make sure, nothing was off. But the dependent, because we were so involved in their back office piece of it, and because I was the only, fiscal person there, we brought on another person. and she does solely just the back office piece, and I do the oversight piece. So going to the site, looking at the big pictures, looking at the revenue, making sure they're not, deficit spending. So having two person there kind of really identify the separation between the back office and the oversight piece of it within our department.
I would add that I'm always very careful in thinking out about how to plan oversight for dependent charters, so that we're not asking, just like I personally don't like to ask any charter for school for something I can go find on the internet myself. I'm not going to ask them to take dashboard data and transfer it from the dashboard to some template for me. We can do that. But with dependent charters, the other thing to also consider is not asking them to recreate or find and locate things that you can get yourself within the organization. So if it's a quick holler down the hallway to personnel to ask a credentialing question, then maybe leave the charter school leader out of gathering that information, because you already have that within the building you're in. And so the same is true with oversight visits, really focusing the visit on not the back office stuff necessarily, but what are the pieces that we need to see out there that really support what's happening, boots on the ground at the school, to validate any type of desk audit we're doing or work that we're doing to support them in the back offices within the organization.
So respectfully, again, at the work we did at LAUSD, it felt like the affiliated, again, dependent charters were a lot easier to do oversight for, because to Barbara's point, you had access to all their teachers. And so doing the NCLB teacher credentialing was non-existent, because again, they were all teacher staff. When it came to fiscal, all that was again done in conjunction with fiscal district staff. So that was taken off the table. Governance was off the table because it was LAUSD's governing board. So you didn't have to either listen to the audios, review all those things, because it was, again, that governing structure of LAUSD. So already within the four major buckets of oversight, you're looking at governance. That was really taken off the table. Academic achievement, again, for the affiliated charter schools at LAUSD, they are some of the highest performing schools in the state in general. So that also was less cumbersome. When it came to operations, again, you looked at those things, but because they were under the umbrella of LAUSD operation, many of those things were school facilities and were checked operationally, and then fiscal. So it was a smaller percentage of what an independent required on a both daily and yearly basis. And when it came to authorization, it was no different, because again, all those things were known, and it wasn't trying to get a culmination of documents and stories together, because you knew their story. They were one of, quote unquote, your schools.
I want to add to that. Renee made me think of something. So at Butte County, the student handbooks and parent notifications is a really good example of this concept. We took that from the schools to make sure that all of the legal requirements were being met, because they weren't. And so within the department, we would put those documents together. We'd send them out to the schools so that they could insert the pieces they wanted to without removing legal requirements, but make updates. And then Michelle would get them and sign off. Because we were overseeing that work and she was signing off on it, we never asked them for a parent student handbook, right? But every organization is set up differently. And so if your dependent charter is one that's putting that document out and it's not being monitored at the LEA, that might be something that you ask for. And then the same thing is true with admissions documents, because we generally don't see those. And so that is something to make sure that your organization is staying out of trouble with. So differentiation, but really thinking of all of the oversight work and site visits in terms of what don't I see on a daily basis. Those are the things to focus on.
And I think Barbara makes a good point, and those are some of the things that, just as the county office, and these are our charters, that we made those decisions because that's not an area of liability that we're willing to risk. We need to make sure that we're compliant with that our superintendent policies cover our charter schools. They don't have their own policies. But all of those bigger pieces of control around curriculum, instruction, assessments, benchmarks. I mean, they're going to follow what we do as the county office in general for all of our schools.
Thank you so much for all of those answers. I think Barbara had one more point
I do.
on, yes, on the
Yeah,
material
revision.
revisions.
My brain is like processing as we're talking. So I am working with a district right now, and there's all this new regulation that came out around ed code that came out around different graduation pathways. And there's a DAS charter school who sent to their authorizing agency a plan to revise their graduation pathways. They set a really very, very, very low bar for graduation. And the authorizer wasn't really thrilled with that. Well, what happened when we went back and we did the research, it's actually written right into their petition that they will follow district graduation requirements. And so my point in that is when you're considering what's a material revision, maybe look back to your charter petitions as well, as a third point, a point of reference to determine whether what they're proposing is actually material in nature or not. And so that was considered material in nature because that was clearly not following the district's path.
Michelle Johnson did have a comment earlier when we were talking about material revision in the chat that was one of the dependent charters. Material revisions was a change in graduation pathway. So good example. Well, we are coming to the end of our presentation here. Thank you so much to our experts that participated. We really appreciate all of your expertise in your specific areas. If we could just quickly go back to the presentation here with a couple more slides. We do have the resources page. There will be a sample dependent charter MOU, and then all of the other resources will be linked in the presentation. They'll appear on the CASI resource page. The next slide is the upcoming CASI events. Like I said, there will be a bonus training that will be on Friday, February 6th. The link is already up on the CDE web page for you to register. If you could please go ahead and put in the chat now anything that you would like to see about non-classroom based charter school oversight. That can be anything from reviewing a charter petition, renewal, oversight, site visits, attendance, you name it, put it in there and I will add it to the training. So just go ahead and utilize the chat for that. We will also have our April quarterly training. That will be the road to renewal. We will also have a little bit about the role of the authorizer with the LCAP. Something that we haven't reviewed before. And then we have the upcoming charter chats. The January one is still there. Oh yeah, that's still coming up. I don't know what day it is. January, February, March, and April. And the next slide is our mentoring program. There is the QR code there. We are still in the development of the mentoring program. We have had over a dozen mentees join. We have spent time interviewing them and helping them specifically with certain things in each of their districts and counties. And we would love to start onboarding some mentors at this point. So if you feel you have some capacity to assist some mentees. This isn't a huge time commitment. It's basically being available for a phone call once in a while to get some clarification or ask questions about a specific charter authorizing topic. Then please fill out the mentoring QR code there. And lastly is our survey. You know that we love feedback. We take all of your questions and suggestions and information and create these quarterly trainings and our charter chats. Everything that we move forward with is something that someone suggested from these feedback surveys. So they're very important to us. If you could please take the time to do that. If we want to drop the link into the chat as well, that would be great. I think I can do that. Oh, somebody did
Already
it. Okay.
done.
Yay! Thanks, Michelle. Thank you so much for everyone who has joined us today. If you think of a non-classroom based item that you would like me to review in the next training, it didn't come to you now, but it comes to you later today, please feel free to email me or any of the other LEAs that support CASI from Santa Clara or LACO, and we will make sure to add that to the training for next month. And again, thank you so much to our expert panel. You were wonderful and filled in all of the gaps for this training today. We really appreciate your time and effort. Thank you so much to everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.